Jim Noyes. I was born in Newbury, Mass.
And where did you grow up?
I grew up, actually I was born in Newburyport, and actually then I went to Newbury. But I grew up in Newbury mostly. I moved to Newbury at age 5.
And what schools did you attend?
Newbury Elementary and Newburyport High School.
Did you play any sports, or were you involved in any clubs or anything like that?
I did, in younger years, I did some track, and I used to belong to a radio club at the high school.
And what did your parents do for work?
My father was a methods and planning engineer for Toll Silversmiths, and my mother was a nurse.
And when did you decide to, why did you decide to join the military?
I don't know. I had started at Northern Essex Community College taking an engineering course, and I had a French-speaking physics teacher teaching me at Northern Essex. So after about 2 months, I decided I'd join the Army.
Which branch, why did you decide on the Army?
I don't know. I had a friend who we had taken our physicals earlier in the year together in Boston, and a guy named Jeff Lane. And he went in early, and I didn't. I was waiting around to see if I wanted to try school. And the Army offered me a school.
What was basic training like?
It was kind of cold. It was in, I went in the Army in October, so it was November, December, and January. It was kind of cold.
Of what year?
63, 64. So,
How did they transfer you to basic?
well, that got me an interesting time. I had never been on a train, a plane, or a commercial bus. I did all 3 of them in the one day I went in out of Boston Army.
Did you have any specialized training?
Yes, I was trained in radar repair.
What were your instructors like?
They were kind of interesting too. At that time was that Cassius Clay was turning down the draft, and somebody in the class had asked him, what would you do if you had Cassius Clay in your class and he wasn't behaving, and how would you treat him? He said, I would treat him as sir.
Can you tell us a little bit about your job for radar?
Well, it got to be interesting in the first year or so, because wherever I went, I was either excess or non-authorized. So I didn't make any promotions in the first year or so I was there. I was in Fort Benning, Georgia, and I did a lot of yard work and general maintenance until we were merged with the 11th Air Assault. The 11th Air Assault was doing division mobile training with helicopters for assaults. This was before Vietnam started as such. And then they went on beyond that when they were going to make the first CAV. I don't know how many people know this, but the first CAV couldn't come back to the United States because it lost its colors during Korean War. So in the 2nd Division, who was at Fort Benning, they did a paper shuffle. 2nd Division went to Korea. 1st CAV came to the States for one day, and they went to Vietnam. And I was taken out of that 1st CAV 1 week before that happened, and we went into a separate company.
Where else were you stationed during your time?
Well, I was at Fort Dix, Fort Monmouth, and Fort Benning, and Monmouth was a school I went to, and down in New Jersey, and Benning before we went to Vietnam, and that was my main company in Vietnam was at Saigon. I was stationed at Vung Tau, and I traveled the whole country.
Um, how long were you in the military for?
3 years.
And do you have any other family members who served?
I have uncles, 2 uncles that served. My father was called up for the draft, but he flunked the physical, so he was in the home guard, I guess they called it. One uncle went to in the Pacific Theater, was wounded, and was recovered in Australia, and an uncle went to Panama, and he couldn't take the heat and got sick all the time, so they discharged him.
Did you have any, were there any difficulties coming back from Vietnam?
Well, it was a very quick transition. We went to the processing center in Vietnam. They put us in a building, and they said they apologized for no sandbags on the building because nobody stayed long enough to fill sandbags. So if they got shelled, you had no place to duck, so I put it that way. And they said, just take a mattress, put it over your head. And they put us on an airplane the next day, and we left at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I think we got into California somewhere close to 9 o'clock the next day, which was only 24 hours, actually the same day, actually, because it went over the international date line. And it was kind of weird to be in a bus headed to processing, to have people honking your horns at your bus because you weren't going fast enough. Yeah.
What rank were you when you were discharged?
I was Specialist 4th.
And do you have any medals or citations you're particularly proud of?
Not, well, I didn't get any, I wasn't in an actual combat unit, although I had been shot at a few times. But other than that, I only got, I wrote down, I bought my separation papers so I could remember what I got. I never paid much attention to them because there's nothing special in it. Let's see. Vietnam Service Medal, National Defense Medal, Vietnam Campaign Medal, and Expert Rifle.
Do you still keep in touch with any of the people you serve with or attend any reunions?
I don't really. It's actually, to me, I had a father-in-law who was Second World War, and it was interesting. He got in contact with all his buddies. That's partly because during the Second World War, you trained as a unit in stateside, and they sent you over as a unit. When you went to a company in this, you just went. And we went as a company which was formed probably 2 to 3 weeks before I went. And I got over there. I was very friendly with a lot of the guys, but only one guy, he had bought something that hadn't come in the PX, and I shipped it to him after I left. But other than that, I don't think I've talked to anybody I actually worked with when I was there.
What was, to shift topics to West Newbury, what was West Newbury like when did you move to West Newbury?
About 40 years ago.
And what was the town like then?
It was probably like the town I grew up in, Newbury, when I was younger. Newbury was a kind of a real small town 40 years ago, or maybe 50 years ago. Yeah, at least 50, 60 years ago when I was growing up. And the population with Newbury, West Newbury, was about the same when I moved here. And that was part of the reason I went there. The population has now grown by about 1,000 since I've been here.
Were you involved in any of the local government or at all?
I didn't, not this government, no, and I didn't. I joined a service club instead. And I knew a lot of the people in, like Scott Birkenbush and John and Gary Bill and those guys, they all belonged to the same service club I did.
After what did you do after you got back?
I got a job at General Electric, and I started off as an electronic troubleshooter for them in aerospace division.
How do you feel your military service affects you today?
Well, people ask me that question, what I think of it. I think the military service is one of the best experiences you can have behind you.
Would you recommend it to anyone to join the Army or the Air Force, Navy?
It depends on where you go. I was very lucky not to be in the frontline troop. Although in Vietnam there was no such thing as a completely rear echelon place. I keep on thinking of my grandchildren coming up, and my son. My son has never served. He was lucky there wasn't, in his age bracket where he could have gone, there was nothing really seriously going on. So he aged out before they could draft him, or he volunteered or whatever. I don't know if they still have the draft, but it's a good experience, like I say, to have behind you. You can look back at it, and depending on what you're doing, you can survive. But a lot of guys didn't.
Is there any is there anything particularly memorable that stands out during your service for something like a happy moment?
A happy moment?
Yeah. Other than your discharge.
That was a nice day. Yes, it was. Let me see.
Turns out a particularly funny.
Trying to think. Actually, I can tell you it's a kind of a unique thing, in that you got to remember I was only about 18 when I went in, and when I got down to Fort Benning, I was probably still 18 at the time. They were having an inspector general coming in, and everybody was geared up to do it. And apparently they had an extra Jeep that needed to be somebody stand beside it. And the Jeep was assigned to somebody who was in the orderly room. And so they said, go stand next to that Jeep. Fine. The Jeep was a new one that just came in and had four speed on the floor and independent wheel suspension, and it had problems with it because it would flip over if you going too fast and you put the brakes on. I didn't learn that until later, because I never drove the vehicle. I never had a license to drive it in the military. And this general walks up to me and says, well, this is a nice vehicle. You like it? I said, I don't know, sir. What do you mean, I don't know, sir? I never driven it. I told him I didn't. And I think that got me in bad sets with the commanding officer when I said that.
Is there anything else you'd like anything we didn't ask you about that you want to go over?
Well,
any stories from your time that you want to tell?
Well, I can tell you some of the places I was in Vietnam. Because I was our company was in Vietnam, was the 125th Air Traffic Control Company. And we had all the small Army airfields all over Vietnam. Where I was at Bung Tao, people will tell you that who experienced it, Bung Tao was supposed to be an R&R center. And, well, that's rest and relaxation for all the troops in the country who didn't want to go like to Hong Kong or someplace. And the man in charge of the base decided, because it was an R&R center, I should take down all the bunkers and stuff. Well, we got shelled that night, and we built all the bunkers back up again. And I got to see all sorts of, went to Pleiku. Pleiku had a small airfield there, and used to take off downhill and land uphill. It didn't have a flat runway. And then I went to another I went to Conson Island. We put a radar system up on a mountain outside the Mekong Delta to watch boats coming out of the river. And that was an interesting place to go. That you could hire what they call political prisoners for $1 a day, and the dollar went to the Vietnamese guards to haul the gasoline up to the top of the mountain. That's when the helicopters weren't available to take it up there. And then they had another one that was out near the Cambodian border, which was an old World War II Japanese runway. And the Air Force would, well, the runway was so old that they were driving C-130s and coming in for supplies with gasoline and everything. And the runway was so old that the big planes would rip up the stones in the runway. So the Air Force would bring in a crew to repair the tires of the runway of the airplanes that came in. And then they would always leave at night. They wouldn't stay overnight with us. I had to stay there about a week because the radar was down, and I was waiting for a part to come in. And so when the part came in, I got to go out again. So that was an interesting place. But the whole country is very interesting, but it was not bad tour for me personally, but it was bad for other people.